Bet the Board.
What do you mean you don't bet? I mean, I don't bet. You know, I don't gamble. I don't. I never have, and I never will. Yeah, right. I'll bet you $20 I can get you gambling before the end of the day.
You owe me 15 grand, pal.
Pay him. Pay that man his money.
It's the Bet the Board podcast.
God likes me. He really, really likes me.
In the end, I wound up right back where I started. I could still pick winners, and I could still make money for all kinds of people back home. And why mess up a good thing?
Here's Payne Insider and Todd Furman.
Welcome into the Bet the Board podcast, powered by FanDuel. I am your host, Todd Furman, joined as always by my esteemed colleague and co-host, the one, the only Payne Insider, to talk a little NFL Week 5.
I didn't know they changed their name. They add a couple L's to the end?
They may have. I wanted to try and elongate exactly how we pronounced our presenting sponsor. But I do have a serious question for you, Payne. You haven't tested for positive for COVID over the last couple days, have you?
No, but yesterday, whether it was a weather change, I started to get some sinus issues. Pounding headache towards the end of yesterday's podcast. Weathered the storm, and here I am.
You are such a trooper. We're all so proud of you for being able to endure the rigors of podcasting schedules throughout the course of the NFL and college football season. Would you like a medal or a cookie for that?
Absolutely. This is a grind. Absolute grind, especially this year with all the injury situations and player uncertainty. And then, I'm roll into a podcast this morning, and for our loyal listeners, I'm getting shots taken at me by Todd Furman.
Oh, yeah,
He's
I'm
throwing
taking
shade
shots.
on my man crush
shots.
Minutes before this podcast started, trying to get me out of form and rhythm.
Every now and again, you got to rattle somebody's cage to get them going, get them focused and tuned in. I mean, we saw that take place in the Dodgers-Padres series. Two teams that get pissed off, they tend to play a little bit better. And so if I have to get under your skin to get the best Payne Insider on a Thursday morning, I'm damn well going to do it.
There you go. What a catch, by the way, by Bellinger.
Oh, incredible. Climbed the ladder there and kept them there. And impressive for the Dodgers to throw nearly 50 pitches in the ninth inning and still hang on for dear life. The unfortunate part is I think Kenley Jansen may have pitched his last ninth inning in a save situation if the Dodgers are intent on winning a World Series this year.
I didn't get a chance to watch the end of the game. I just saw the play, and I was like, I didn't know Cody Bellinger had that in him.
He came up big.
Maybe Wesley Snipes between innings kind of pumped up the sneaker there.
Slapping the leather a little bit, giving the Dodgers a commanding 2-0 series lead there. Massive favorites to advance to the NLCS, most likely alongside the Atlanta Braves. You can follow Payne on Twitter at Payne Insider. I'm Todd Furman. You can follow me there. We'll have John Sheeran of FanDuel with us later on in the show. Curious to get his take on exactly how this weekend is shaping up and what Monday meant to them, knowing that you had two elite quarterbacks both covering with relative ease in Kansas City and Green Bay. And, of course, plenty of big game breakdowns to get to. So, Payne, we may as well head off to the Keystone State, where the Pittsburgh Steelers return from a league-imposed bye week of sorts to play host to the Philadelphia Eagles. And you're looking at the Steelers, a touchdown favorite at FanDuel. Total on this game, 44.5. The Steelers are one of 6 remaining undefeated teams in the National Football League. And for the first time all year, they will be allowed to have fans in the building. 5,500, the magic number. Philadelphia, meanwhile, let's see how they handle. What are you laughing about over there?
It's 5,500 is the magic number there.
Apparently in the state of Pennsylvania and Western PA, it is indeed the magic number.
Interesting. Okay.
All right. Moving on with this. I've had enough of you already, and we haven't even broke down on one game yet. Philadelphia, of course, returning back to the state of Pennsylvania after a big outright upset of the San Francisco 49ers in Sunday Night Football. And I think, Payne, when you talk about the Eagles and Steelers, the best place to start is discussions of the Eagles' offense matched up against the Steelers' defense. And to call the Eagles, in my opinion, a glorified reclamation project may probably be too positive, given what they're dealing with, a team that's had a turnover differential of -5 this season, tied for third worst in the NFL. Carson Wentz turned the ball over 8 times himself. Wentz has been sacked 14 times this season. Only Deshaun Watson and Burrow have hit the canvas more often. When you look at Philadelphia's offensive game plan, how are they best served to attack that Steelers defensive front?
Going to be tough. Let's just put it that way.
All right, we can move on to the other side of the ball.
You're kind of a little snarky this day. little Thursday morning snark out of you.
A little jacked up.
Well, I'm all jacked up on Mountain Dew. All right. When you look at this, right, like Sunday night was wild to me because Philly put together some timely drives. They looked competent situationally at times against this very, what I would call a beat up and vanilla 49ers defense. But the offense wasn't really that good, in Sunday night's game. 270 yards of offense, 4.5 yards per play, 44% success rate. Most of it was manufactured by Doug Peterson. There was a lot of, I would say, work put into that offensive performance. It was a struggle, it felt like, for every single yard. This doesn't appear like the right matchup for Philly's offense. We know the offensive line has probably performed better than anyone would expect when you kind of figure out what they've gone through. They're fourth in the league in pass block win rate. I'm just not going to believe that as a long-term viable number for the Eagles' offensive line right now. And believe it or not, like, Wentz has been pressured on 32% of his dropbacks. I thought that number would have been significantly higher, especially for as long as Wentz holds on to the ball and all of those offensive line injuries. I mean, you look last week, Wentz took the second longest time to throw the ball of any quarterback. It just feels like this is the spot where water meets its level a little bit there. Pittsburgh's defense, number one in the NFL in pressure rate. They've gotten pressure nearly 47% of the time when quarterbacks drop back to pass. No other team is above 31%. And when you just kind of play this out, you've lost Brandon Brooks. You've lost Andre Dillard to injury before the season. Vaitai moves on in free agency. You bring back Jason Peters. You shift him over to left tackle. He's placed on IR before the 49ers game. Then Lane Johnson couldn't finish the 49ers game with an ankle injury. The team is hinting and suggesting that this is going to be a lingering issue until the offseason. We'll see if he can battle through it. But I just think that matchup there along the offensive line could be a real problem here for Carson Wentz. It's also tough to envision that he gets support from the ground game here. Steelers number one in defensive adjusted line yards, so they're not allowing opposing offenses to push them around in the trenches and create holes for running backs. We know Philly likes to target their running backs out of the backfield. Small sample size, Pittsburgh's allowed the least amount of receptions to running backs. The other thing here, Todd, and it's kind of, dorky, so hopefully it doesn't turn some people off, but Philly's offense played left-handed Sunday night. We know Dallas Goedert, probably Philly's best offensive weapon at this point, is on IR. He's the reason Ertz hasn't gotten the extension that he wants. But the point here is, like, Goedert would play significant amounts of time with Ertz on the field simultaneously. The Eagles used the most two tight end sets last season. First 3 weeks this year, Eagles' base offense was 12 personnel. Two tight ends, 59% of the time. Against San Francisco, though, the Eagles' base offense was 11 personnel, 60% of their snaps, with 3 wide sets. And they played this way despite this beaten and battered receiver group. In my mind, it's one thing to catch team off guard. Let's see if it works a second time here. I'm not sure it's going to be once you kind of put that on film that's now going to be how you decide to operate offensively because of this injury to Goedert. In addition to, kind of Goedert being out and forcing Philly to play left-handed, Pittsburgh, when you look at them defensively right now, they've allowed 23% of plays to grade successful from two tight end sets. They have been fantastic against that type of alignment. They've given up 1.6 yards per rush from two tight end sets. So trying to attack Pittsburgh that way, it's probably not ideal. So I just think this is another game offensively for Philadelphia, Todd, where they're going to be forced to play left-handed again.
Carson Wentz legs, baby, at 37 yards rushing on 7 carries against the 49ers, including the 11-yard touchdown run. Had 65 yards rushing against the Bengals, which also included the touchdown to ultimately send that game to overtime. So I'm interested to see if that actually becomes a component, whether it's designed or whether it's his scrambling ability to try and extend plays.
Can I ask you something?
Sure,
and I don't mean to catch you off the cuff here and catch you off guard.
All good.
We talked about Carson Wentz and his rushing ability probably back-to-back weeks. I know we didn't discuss the Bengals game publicly, but we talked about it a little bit privately, and then we did break down the Eagles game last week against San Francisco. We knew the legs would be this added element. Do you remember what his rushing yards prop was last week?
I don't. I definitely don't think it was anywhere close in this market.
No.
I want to say it was in that 11.5 to 15.5 range.
Yes, and it's, we've increased based upon everything going on this year, our usage of props on the games that are actually being played. So after that, I'm watching, I'm like, we talked about this all GD week, and for some reason it didn't make our card, and it was like the easiest thing in the world. So maybe something to look at this week. Don't know if the market has adjusted for that quite yet.
Yeah, it's always interesting, and I think, as we see more books entering this space and FanDuel being a leader with a lot of what they do in terms of player props, it's a market where I think there's much more opportunity than there would have been, say, 5-7 years ago. The unfortunate part for any of us living out here in Nevada, we probably have the least extensive offering in terms of expanded menus. So I know when we discuss a lot of these props, I go fishing around for them and go, this would be great if I lived in New Jersey. Unfortunately, I don't have access to it out here in the desert.
That's absolutely the case. And the one thing, when you start to dig into some of these like primetime games specific to last week, you will see the prop limits rise a touch. So those seem to be some of the games where the professional prop guys seem to attack a little bit more.
And it's one of those things that we've talked about, not to go off on a tangent, for, bettors out there that are looking to try and hit a higher percentage and they're not worried about the larger stakes that are available. I'd encourage all of our listeners to spend time figuring out props, because it's a much more inefficient market than what you're talking about from a full game and full total perspective. If you're looking to move significantly less than some of the larger betting groups and you're not after 5 figures, there's nothing wrong with trying to make a living or a nice secondary income and or some spending cash, just attacking some of the props that are out there now.
Yeah, without question. Question. And even the larger ones are doing it if they have enough outs, right? Even getting down, $2.50 a nickel a dime through, 25 or 50 outs is certainly sufficient.
Yeah, it'll add up pretty damn quickly, that's for sure. On the other side of the ball, Payne, when we look at the Steelers' offense, I think it's probably best described at this point as a work in progress. Ben had some strong words on the stoppage. I know you read a little bit differently than I did, but I think we ultimately arrived at the same point in terms of what he was alluding to, given the disruption in schedule. And you look at the Steelers, they've outgained their 3 opponents so far this year by nearly 300 yards. They're 4th in the NFL in average time of possession, top 10 rushing attack, and you could see the difference that James Conner has really benefited from a viable passing attack compared to last year where teams could just stack the box. And when you look at the Steelers, though, they have bogged down, scoring a touchdown in just 50% of their red zone drives. The chemistry becomes apparent with Big Ben and Deontay Johnson, which of course calls Juju Smith-Schuster's future into question, I'm sure, as a member of the black and gold going forward. And when you look at this Philadelphia defense, though, the one thing they still do well is apply pressure. They lead the NFL with 17 sacks. They had 5 a week ago and 15 quarterback hits. Is that something they can exploit against a bit of a statue quarterback in Big Ben?
Possibly, but the one thing we always know about Big Ben, or at least in recent years, he gets the ball out on time, gets the ball out quickly. One of the fastest releases among quarterbacks in recent years. So I don't know if they'll be able to get to him there. The one thing when I look at this side of the matchup, and it's kind of in addition to Philly's offense not looking great last week and again being forced to play left-handed, the other reason we have seen this total crash down from 47.5 to now as low as 43.5, and it actually looks like it's ticking back up right now. No 43.5s in the market, 44 now the lowest. In addition to some weather speculation, it's because of all the things you mentioned there about the Steelers' offense. It's struggling a little bit right now. Big Ben is still trying to gain his form, his rhythm. He has graded out the 21st best quarterback among QBs that have played at least 3 games. The completion percentage is below expectation. The offense is slightly below average in terms of overall offensive efficiency at 18th. Where Pitt is really struggling, though, is on early downs. And right now, the Steelers are 29th in overall success rate on first down, 27th in the NFL in success rate when you combine first and second down. That's the one that's most predictive, so they have to get that situation figured out. And the Steelers' offense right now, they've played against a schedule of defenses that are below average in efficiency against both the run and pass, so it's a little concerning on that front, but I do think it has the potential to trend in a better direction. I think the best path here, if I was, trying to figure out success, barring weather, is to attack Philly's secondary and early downs through the air. Right now, Philadelphia's faced one of the 8 easiest schedules of passing offenses, But on first down, even with the addition of Darius Slay, who's been fantastic and looks like a true shutdown corner, the Eagles are 23rd in defending the pass, allowing 58% of throws to grade successful on first down. Bottom third in the NFL in the same metric against passes on first and second down. So I think that's the key here. Get the ball out of Ben's hands quickly, as you alluded to evade that pressure. Start passing on early downs. Formationally, the Steelers' base offense operates with 3 wide receivers almost 70% of the time. Eagles defense, they've allowed 52% of passes to grade successful against 3 wide sets, and they're giving up 5.6 yards per rush from those same sets. So it'll be interesting to see, get James Conner going. And I think there's some, at least in my mind, some things to be had here against this Philadelphia defense. I really believe that. We also mentioned this briefly during the Week 1 Monday night preview when Pittsburgh took on the Giants, Todd, about keeping an eye on the addition of QB coach Matt Canada and his influence on the Steelers' offensive coordinator, Randy Fichtner. So far, there has been some influence, right? Fichtner is listening to Matt Canada because Pittsburgh's offense right now using motion at the snap at the 6th highest clip in the NFL. We know that's given the Eagles linebackers some issues this season as well when they've gone against the likes of the Rams. Yeah. You kind of grazed over the Big Ben thing. How do you feel about that?
You know what? I think you brought some things to my attention, that he's a veteran quarterback. I think trying to make a statement about what needs to be done in these uncharted waters that the entire league is in with the pandemic and everything else. He could talk about rust playing a role, but you can't imagine that a guy who was out there started a couple weeks in a row is suddenly going to regress because he didn't play the following Sunday. I think it becomes a warning shot to everybody else. Hey, look, shape up or ship out. If we want to get this season done, it's not just 1 or 2 teams. It's everybody in the league buying into the protocols, making sure that we can have this season played and not go through some of the disruptions we dealt with in Major League Baseball, because quite frankly, the NFL doesn't have that luxury. You can't play 13 doubleheaders if the Cardinals and Marlins are doing stupid shit on their own in the National Football League. We're not going to play the Super Bowl in April because the Titans aren't fit to play a football game until the middle of November.
Yeah, that's what it felt like to me. Now, obviously, Big Ben sat out last season, so he is probably directionally right here, right? He wants to get in form. He wants to stay in rhythm. He thought the offense was probably clicking in the second half of the Houston game where they played virtually keep away. I think Houston had 17 offensive snaps in the second half of that game, so he wanted to keep the ball rolling, no doubt. But the reality is they practiced early last week. There was really only about a 3-day respite, and I'm not sure that's enough to throw the Steelers' offense completely out of whack here. I think, to your point, it was more of a I'm going to vent through the media to the NFL that I'm abiding by all the rules personally. We know Ben said no family, no friends are coming into town and staying with me or hanging out with me at any point this season, just immediate family only. And the Steelers, I think, as a very smart and sharp organization, have kind of adhered to that same mindset. So at some point, the NFL is either going to have to fine or forfeit these games where teams just are not abiding by the rules. And I think that was more so Ben's point here, because now they don't get a bye later in the season.
Well, when you talk about smart and sharp organizations, Payne, we know in the National Football League, all of those dialogues begin with the Cleveland Browns. And, of course, the Browns
You're just
have a
firing
massive...
shots at everybody today.
Well, I mean, if I'm in one of those
initially,
moods...
I think people thought I was kind of in like a weird mood, but now they're starting to realize after about 18 to 20 minutes of the show, like, oh, Todd's just flinging shots today.
This is what happens when my blood sugar drops early on a Thursday morning, and, I'm sitting here tapping my finger, trying to make sure that we provide the best information that we possibly can. The Indianapolis Colts go out on the road for the second straight week, this time to Cleveland. The Colts are a 1.5-point favorite at FanDuel. Total in this game, 46.5. And the Browns have suddenly righted the ship, so to speak. After losing week 1 to the Baltimore Ravens, they look a lot more like the playoff team we envisioned they could be on the heels of a pretty good offensive explosion at the hands of the Dallas Cowboys last weekend. Baker Mayfield clearly benefiting immensely from Kevin Stefanski's run-based offense as the Browns ran up 300-plus yards, and it was by committee. Nick Chubb, before he left the game, we'll talk about his injury in a moment. You saw Dearness Johnson pick up the slack, and of course Kareem Hunt now has a time to shine as a bona fide number 1 for a man that's cleaned up his act, and you hope that he can get things figured out with the opportunity right now that he'll have. But you look at Baker Mayfield, Payne, and he's compiled a 6-1 record in his last 7 home games. 15 touchdowns, only 5 giveaways. We look at how the last 3 quarterbacks, Kirk Cousins, Sam Darnold, and Nick Foles, have performed against this Colts defense. 2 touchdown passes and 7 interceptions. Suddenly, Baker Mayfield looks like Kirk Cousins 2.0 in Cleveland. They're operating off the play action, and it's really paying dividends. But the absence of Nick Chubb in terms of what Cleveland wants to do, I don't think is a death blow by any stretch of the imagination. But matched up against the Colts defense, this is ultimately where rubber meets the road. Who has the edge, in your opinion, on this side of the ball?
Business as usual for the Browns offense. And when you look at them in totality and what Kevin Stefanski's doing, he's been nothing short of spectacular. I would describe, his offense right now as, simple complexity. Everyone knows that Cleveland wants to establish the run. Nick Chubb, you mentioned him, he's obviously out for this game, but he's faced 8 or more man boxes on 25% of his carries. Kareem Hunt, 30% of his carries. Yet Cleveland can still run the ball. The Browns are second in rushing efficiency, number 1 in explosive runs by like this ridiculous margin. They have 30 explosive runs already. But you're looking at Kevin Stefanski, he's really diversifying things despite this national narrative that Cleveland's offense is like something from 1920. It's really wild to see. And if you really truly dig into Cleveland's offense right now, the run rates aren't as ridiculous as people are making them sound. Like Cleveland's run rate the first 3 quarters is 46%. So Stefanski is passing more than the Vikings offense he led last season. Formationally, Stefanski is mixing things up, right? Cleveland's offense, they come out right now in all these different sets and formations. 5 different formations have been used at least 8% of the time. Stefanski hasn't lived in a single formation more than 35% of snaps. So he's really diversifying some things here, and I think that probably plays a role here against what's metrically the number 1 defense in the league in Indianapolis.
And we'll get there because I want to get your honest assessment. But you talk about the number 1 defense metrically, so let's heap praise on the Colts before you cut down the tree that apparently is growing in this Colts defensive and reaping benefits. I don't know where I was going with that, but I wasn't getting there anywhere quickly. We look at Indianapolis.
Yeah. Go ahead.
No, they held the Bears to just 28 rushing yards in their 19-11 win last week. It's the fewest allowed by the Indianapolis Colts defense since 2009. They've already intercepted 7 passes this season. Last year, they picked off 15, which we thought was a very good mark. They've now allowed 11 points or fewer in 3 straight games, the first time since 2013. They have the NFL's number 1 scoring defense for the first time since 2007. They're number 1 in total yards allowed per game, 236 and a shade. Yards passing, they're giving up less than 160 a contest. Fewest points allowed at 14. We mentioned the interceptions. They're 4th in rushing defense, tied for 8th in sacks. And oh, by the way, the defense has actually scored 18 points, which feels better than a half the teams in the league these days. But let's not consider this the 1985 Bears or the Ray Lewis Baltimore Ravens defense, knowing that they haven't exactly faced the strongest strength of opposing offenses.
Well, 2 things there. You have the Colts defense in your fantasy league, so that's a solid pick there. And number 2, you're right. I don't think anyone's going to confuse Indy's defense with Ray Lewis's. The funny thing here, though, Todd, is the shift in perception. Like it's really wild to me because just in week 1, like Matt Eberflus's defense was being ridiculed for being far too basic, right? Because Gardner Minshew goes out and completes like all but 1 pass. And now all of a sudden they're being like lauded as this elite defense, and you start to look, it's like in week 2 the Colts faced the Vikings offense, and they didn't realize at that point that Justin Jefferson was ready to contribute. And then you got Adam Gase in the Jets offense, and then you got Chicago making a change at quarterback, and Indy knew, Foles like the back of their hand. So while Indy's defense is good, and I do believe they're improved because the talent has improved there, I don't think anyone believes it's the most efficient defense in the league right now. And, when you look at Cleveland's offense and Stefanski, I think the diversity should help because Indy has had some holes in certain areas. They haven't been overly stout defending runs from 3 wide receiver sets. Indy's also allowing 55% of passes to great successful from 2 tight end sets with a 111 passer rating. And if you look, Indy's defense hasn't forced a single sack when offenses use 2 tight end formations. So, Cleveland being able to mix and match should work here. And the important thing to look for this week, Todd, right now, there's 2 injuries to monitor for Indy. Both starting linebackers, Darius Leonard and Bobby Okereke, are injured. Darius Leonard didn't return to the Bears game with the groin injury, hasn't practiced yet this week. Okereke had surgery on Monday. Again, neither have practiced to this point, so we'll have to look at the injury reports, the next 2 days or so. But I think that would certainly hinder, the elite part of the Colts defense, which is defending passes over the middle, defending tight ends and running backs. Because if you look, Indy right now, top 10 across the board in both receptions and yards allowed to both running backs and tight ends. If both linebackers miss, it should open things up a touch for Hunt catching balls out of the backfield. Maybe Hooper wakes up a little bit as well. So that's the interesting part here. The other one last tidbit is the Browns' offensive line. It has been fantastic. They are literally mauling people. Number 1 in adjusted line yards on offense. And Indy's defensively, their D-line, even though they went out and traded for Buckner, it's kind of just in the middle of the pack in adjusted line yards. So this will be a big test for the Colts defense, knowing that they've faced a below-average run schedule to date. They're going to get really tested here. I think Cleveland probably will still be able to control the trenches a pretty good amount here. The other thing is when you look at red zone, that's kind of the one area where Indy's defense hasn't been as elite as people are making them sound. They're below average in red zone defense. Cleveland, on the other hand, because they can run, and that's really the one area where you want to be able to run is in the red zone, they've been lights out. So maybe this is a game where there aren't a ton of possessions, where it's a slowed down game a little bit because we know the Colts kind of operate at a slower pace. So some of those red zone trips are going to be vital to be efficient in there. And Cleveland's been really good inside that red zone.
Well, if we're giving the Colts defense a ton of credit, although they may be paper tigers at least through their first 4 games, the Colts offense has been a work in progress, and that may be a more positive spin on it than I otherwise could put. When you look at Indianapolis, who's outscored their opponents 83-29 over their last 3 games, Phillip Rivers on Sunday against the Bears, workmanlike might be the best adjective I could use to describe his performance, completing just 55% of his passes for 190 yards and a touchdown. I mean, honestly, Payne, we look at this Colts and we talk all the time about how good this offensive line has been. The ground game has really struggled. The offense has the lowest yards per carry average in the league at 3.5 right now. The offense allowed 9 tackles for loss in Sunday's win over the Bears. And when you look at how they performed in the red zone, I mean, yes, they converted 8 out of 19 third downs against the Bears, but their 35% conversion rate on third down is amongst the league's lowest, and they've scored just 7 times on 15 trips inside the red zone. What's going on with the Colts offense, and can the Browns defense quietly have some success here?
I think the Colts offense needs to be more aggressive right now, especially early on in the game. You look last week and you made mentions of how they performed against the Bears. It was really conservative after that opening touchdown drive, which, featured a ton of heavy sets, as we kind of pointed out on the podcast last week would be the way to attack the Bears defense. The heavy formations became virtually non-existent from that touchdown moving forward. I don't know what Frank Reich was doing. Even talk about some of the other conservative natures from that game. Indianapolis had 10 first down snaps at or inside the Bears' 40-yard line last week. Every single one of those first down snaps was a called run play. So, that's partly why the rush numbers don't look so good, because the Colts right now are being very predictable. I would think the offense opens up a little bit more moving forward once there's a little more trust in Phillip Rivers. This would probably be a smart game to do it, at least early on for sure. Because when you look at how Indy's operating as an offense right now, where they've been best, and also how you want to attack the Browns defense, passing the ball makes the most sense. The Colts offensive line, to me, hasn't been really good this season, creating room for the ground game. And if you remember, leading into the season opener, there was a couple guys along the O-line that were beaten up, that were injured. Now, they didn't miss the game, but they have been playing through these injuries, and that's partly why the O-line hasn't been as dominant. And so you're looking right now at an O-line for the Colts that's 28th in adjusted line yards, so they're just not getting that push up front that we've grown accustomed to. It's resulted in Indy being 28th in rushing efficiency and dead last in the league in rushing success rate. The Colts rushing success rate now is 13% below league average. It's crazy when you think about going out and spending an early round draft pick on Taylor and the money that you've allocated to that offensive line. Just nuts. But Cleveland's defense, we've talked about it. Their strength is the D-line, top 10 against the run, but bottom third and a lot of, important metrics against the pass. And so I think it's important to attack through the air. But when Indy does ultimately decide to run it, and they will, I think outside zone is where Indy's been best, but that's also where the Browns have been most vulnerable against the run. But the key to this, Todd, is attacking the Browns defense through the air. And I think how Indy chooses to do that's really important too. Like, you're looking at Frank Reich. Like, the guy's going to forget more football than I'll ever know if I live like 10 lifetimes. But Indy is just significantly better passing from heavy sets. They just need to do it more. And if you look, Indy's passing success rate is 7% better when throwing from 12 formation with 2 tight ends rather than 11 personnel. Passer rating from 12 is a whopping 57 points higher than it is from 11 personnel. And to me, this appears to be somewhat obvious, right? Like, you look at the current health of the roster. Indy has 3 tight ends in Mo Alley Cox and Doyle and Burton. They're all healthy. They're all back now. Meanwhile, like, 2 of the top 3 Colts receivers in Paris Campbell and Michael Pittman are injured. So it's just shocking that you don't roll with heavier formations knowing that. So hopefully we see a little bit more of that this week. And, it makes more sense, again, based upon this matchup. The Browns have issues defending tight ends. Cleveland's allowed the 4th most receptions to tight ends. Allowed 9.8 yards per reception and given up 4 touchdowns in 4 games to the tight end position. So you also look at running backs. 24 of their 28 targets against the Browns defense have been completed. Get Taylor going. Have him catch some passes. Get him moving out of the backfield. Get this 3-headed monster at tight end the ball. I think that's the way that you want to attack Cleveland's defense, through the air with the tight ends and the backs.
Well, and you mentioned some of those things with this Cleveland defense. We know the secondary has been a little bit banged up. You'd have to imagine they're going to get significantly better in the back 7 as the season progresses. And just to take it one step further, as you described the Colts offense, Frank Reich was pretty open and honest. He was quoted this week as saying, we had the 4th and 1 early on. Normally I'm going to go for that 9 times out of 10, but that's an example where I'm just not putting it on autopilot every one of those decisions when it's 4th and really short. I felt the way our defense was playing at that point early in the game, we had the lead. I didn't want to create a momentum shift if for some reason we didn't make it, aka the Bears offense sucks, and we didn't think we had to do a whole heck of a lot.
Yes, that is partly the concern. And then obviously, you mentioned some of the red zone woes at the top of this breakdown. And, when you use these 3 wide sets and 2 of your top 3 guys are down and you don't have a mobile quarterback and you haven't shown the ability to run, that's why they've had some of the red zone woes as well. But I think this week, hopefully, at least early on, we see a little bit more aggression from the Colts offense, especially just because I think it's needed. You're looking at a passing offense, and everyone again continues to kind of crap on Phillip Rivers. 14th in passing efficiency, despite learning all these new weapons in a shortened offseason, and 2 of your top 3 pass-catching guys are injured. So, we got to start giving Phillip Rivers a little bit more credit here. I think he's kind of being retaught the position, so to speak, but I would expect maybe a little bit more pass-heavy of an offense to start this game against Cleveland.
Well, if you talk about pass-heavy teams, you may not see that on full display between Indianapolis and Cleveland, but you sure as well see it on full display come Sunday Night Football, where it's the Minnesota Vikings on the road in the Pacific Northwest to take on the Seattle Seahawks. And you're looking at Seattle in this particular football game, a full touchdown favorite at FanDuel, total on the game paying 57.5. The second time in franchise history, the Seahawks are 4-0. The only other time they did that, they went on to win the Super Bowl. KJ Wright pretty much said it's a change in philosophy, going from a lockdown elite defense to an offense that can't be stopped. They finished the game against Miami for the 4th time in franchise history without a penalty. Meanwhile, the Vikings on the other side, they ride a 6-game losing streak in against the Seahawks. 4 of Minnesota's defeats have come under Zimmer, including multiple December trips that we both remember all too vividly to a deafening CenturyLink field each of the past 2 seasons. When you look at Seattle, betting them blindly over the last 35 games, well, it would have paid quite a nice dividend. 23-12 against the spread. But the Vikings, Payne, they may have found an offensive rhythm, and suddenly it's gone hand in hand with the emergence of rookie wide receiver Justin Jefferson.
Spot on. Minnesota's offense right now is starting to trend up. Justin Jefferson's playing a greater percentage of snaps the last 2 weeks than the first 2. Guys like B.C. Johnson and, Chad Beebe and Tajay Sharp are almost completely being phased out, which is smart. And I know if you kind of just broad stroke the numbers, the Vikings look average on offense, 16th in overall offensive efficiency. but they've been really good on early downs. They're trending upwards. I think the overall efficiency number will start to catch up with how the Vikings are performing on early downs. And right now, Minnesota has the number one early down offense in the NFL, if you can believe that. And it's in part to their explosiveness. Because they run it so often, it really gets these linebackers and DBs to bite up, and then you attack through the air that way. 15% of Minnesota's first or second down offensive snaps have finished in an explosive play, mostly because they've been hitting big plays through the air, especially to guys like Justin Jefferson. First and second down, I think, is where Minnesota is going to have to pick up some chunk yards through the air here, Todd. Those are the downs where Seattle's defense could really be had through the air. 24th in explosive pass defense on those downs. Overall, Seattle's secondary, 29th in defensive pass efficiency. I think this needs to be a Kirk Cousins game, and I get it. I think a lot of people have remembered what he's done in the past, where in these primetime spots, he hasn't performed very well. Minnesota, obviously a different team away from home, one of the largest home-road dichotomies. They've made back-to-back trips to Seattle in as many years, failed miserably in both. But I do think this situation is a touch different, right? You don't have fans, so Cousins doesn't have to deal with that. The noise and the pressure of the 12th man that puts on opposing quarterbacks. I think this is, obviously that's difficult to deal with, but I think, it will probably bode well for Cousins because this is a different kind of trip, not having to deal with some of those elements. The other thing here is you're looking at Cousins, and where he struggled a little bit this year is when he's under pressure. And the Vikings O-line just hasn't been very good. 42% of Cousins' dropbacks have resulted in pressure. They just really have regressed in that area as well. You look at something like pass block win rate. Minnesota's 24th in that category. But when you look across the field, and this is always important, when you're gauging injuries or you're gauging matchups, can the opponent take kind of control or advantage of that deficiency? And Seattle's defense right now, I don't know if they can take advantage of the Vikings' offensive line. Right now, 20% pressure rate on the season, one of the worst in the NFL. It's translated into having the 5th worst adjusted sack rate. So I'm not sure, that Seattle front is going to be able to get to Cousins as much as we've seen him pressured in the first 4 weeks of the season. On the back end, Seattle's going to be without Jamal Adams again. And with the bye week on deck, I'm not sure it makes sense to rush back Quinton Dunbar either, Todd. I know he was kind of running off to the side yesterday, hasn't really gotten acclimated back into the practice realm yet. I think he's probably a long shot to go. So now you're dealing with 2 key cogs out in that Seattle secondary as well.
Yeah, I'm of the same mindset as you. You start the year 4-0. There's no reason to rush any of these guys back. And we talked about it going into the game against the Dolphins off the air, about what Seattle's defense would look like. And I think lost in those numbers of a 31-23 victory, that had more to say about the Dolphins' offensive ineptitude than it did anything Seattle was doing differently. Now, to the Seahawks' credit, they had allowed 8 big plays of 25-plus yards for the first 3 games. They only surrendered 1. But again, I'm going to pin that on the shoulders of Chan Gailey more so than Seattle figuring things out defensively. Minnesota would be well advised to take multiple shots to Thielen, Jefferson, and of course continue to get Dalvin Cook involved, who had his biggest game of the season with 130 rushing yards and 2 touchdowns against the Houston Texans. Now, while the outlook may look significantly better for the Vikings offensively against the Seahawks defense, clearly the Seattle offense is going to give Mike Zimmer plenty of sleepless nights leading up to Sunday night's affair. When you look at Russell Wilson, 16 touchdown passes through 4 games, ties him with Peyton Manning for the most through 4 games of a season. You saw him spread the ball around, utilizing 9 different receivers against Miami, and Greg Olsen actually led the charge with 5 catches. Third time in 4 games, Wilson has found a way to connect with 9 different pass catchers. Payne, we knew coming into the season the Vikings defense was going to be a work in progress. You look at rookies in Jeff Gladney and Cameron Dantzler, the key cogs in the secondary, probably not what you want against Russell Wilson. How does Minnesota begin to even go about devising a game plan, knowing that getting pressure on Russell will be a struggle, and they have so much inexperience in that defensive backfield?
I don't know. It's tough to envision the Vikings getting many stops here. And you think about it at this very simple level. Last season, with a better Vikings defense under Zimmer, going against a version of Seattle's offense that wasn't operating as optimally as they are now because Shoddy wasn't allowing Russell Wilson to throw enough. And yet, Seattle still managed to hang 37 back in that Week 13 matchup, and that was with Zimmer off a bye week, having 2 weeks to prepare for Seattle's offense. So when you put it in that simple context, it's going to be extremely difficult. And you start to dig back into that game a little bit, and that's a game where Seattle moves it efficiently through the air, had a 59% passing success rate against Minnesota last season. Minnesota couldn't stop the run either in that game, gave up 5.1 a carry. I don't see how this is going to suddenly change this week when we have a Vikings defense that gets pushed around a little bit at the line of scrimmage, 29th in adjusted line yards. It's why Minnesota right now 24th in defensive rush efficiency, and even through the air. The Vikings are dead last in explosive pass defense. This is also a Minnesota defense that isn't getting pressure, as you alluded to, on quarterbacks, just a 19% pressure rate. Honestly, if I'm being candid here, the Vikings are going to need Mother Nature to assist here in helping stop the Seattle offense. We were looking at that a little bit earlier this week, about a 30 to 40% chance of rain. Maybe that's going to help the Vikings just a little bit defensively, but there really isn't an area that you can pinpoint here and say, hey, the Vikings can do X, Y, or Z to stop Russell Wilson in the Seattle offense, because it just isn't there. And I think if you're a Vikings fan, Todd, or you're kind of trying to assess the Vikings here moving forward, everyone's kind of assuming that Mike Zimmer is just going to flip a switch and get this defense back to operating how it has in past years. Sometimes you can be too far ahead of markets, and I think that's been the case for us, Todd, a little bit the last few seasons. We've been calling and pounding the table for regression, and it's happened in some of these deeper lying metrics, but hasn't maybe overall. And now we're seeing this. It's come to fruition, and now he's lost a bunch of guys on that side of the ball. Danielle Hunter, who knows when he's going to actually return? His trainer came out and spoke for him this week and said, hey, it's better if this injury that Danielle Hunter has heals naturally. I'm suggesting that he sits out the full season. We know that they lost Everson Griffin. Michael Pierce decided to opt out. You had an injury at middle linebacker to Barr. You went the youth movement in the secondary. Hughes hasn't panned out. He's also been injured. Gladney's trying to take snaps back there. I think in the end he could be very good, but he's a young kid. So really, when we're looking at this Vikings defense, there's only going to be varying degrees of improvement. Your hope is that the young guys get acclimated to Zimmer's system and it can help them improve in that back half a little bit, but you're not going to have a team that gets pressure consistently. You're not going to have a team that's as good defending running back and tight end passes with Barr out. So this is a defense that needs to trend from very bad to just below average, and I think that's probably the best we're going to get out of Minnesota's defense this season, Todd.
When you look at the side and total in this game, Payne, any inkling where you think the market could take these particular numbers? Highest total on the board at 57.5. We've outlined a lot of the concerns for both these teams on the defensive side. And we have seen this number open as high as 9.5 in some locations. FanDuel in that 7.5, 8 range. Obviously, you saw for initial wave of Vikings money. Wasn't quite sure where we were going to see support in the 72 hours leading up to kickoff.
So 2 things. One, with the total, and I kind of mentioned this on Monday, there are very few models that are going to indicate, hey, 57's the right number here, 58's the right number here. You typically start to see resistance from professionals, as we did with that Monday night total in Green Bay and Atlanta. I'll be honest with you. This was the highest total that our model spit out this week at 58. So there isn't really a ton of value. So I think at this point you're monitoring the weather situation, and that will ultimately decide where this total ends up. In terms of the side, we have seen professional money on the Vikings, and this is something else that I mentioned on Monday, kind of using a cheat tool to track where lines open and where they close. And if you've done that, you have seen the last 2 weeks professional money really get out ahead and whack Minnesota. Against the Titans, that line was dummied up to 3, but as soon as it got to that key number, it was absolutely whacked. So we saw professional money on the Vikings against Tennessee at 3. Last week, the same situation. Minnesota got out. There's all this crap going on about missing a couple days of practice. That number got to 5, but ultimately closed soft 3. And then vice versa, we've seen Seattle take money against. That was one of the larger moves of the week against Miami last weekend. opened 7, that thing closed 4. So just little indicators like that are going to help you determine where some of these lines are going to ultimately close. Now, it's a Sunday night game in prime time. It's Russell Wilson. It's Seattle. So I'm not sure how low you can go on this, but we've seen some of the sharper shops trend below that key number of 7. And it wouldn't stun me if we're sitting here looking at potentially 6.5 or soft 7. Books are going to have to play that balancing act game of managing where all the public money is going to come in for the primetime spot versus what they're taking professionally. And I think we're probably sitting at a good number here, whether you're going to go to a juiced 6.5 on the favorite or you're going to go to a soft 7 on the dog.
Definitely makes a ton of sense. There's no doubt this game will have a slew of eyeballs on it, as you'll see two of the more prolific offenses, at least the way the Vikings are trending. And we know Russell Wilson right now, the MVP frontrunner, so let's hope we get plenty of entertainment value this week on Sunday Night Football. You can follow Payne on Twitter at Payne Insider. I'm Todd Furman. You can follow me there. Most importantly, follow the podcast at Bet the Board Pod. And we know you guys that have tuned in for the first 40 some odd minutes of this show are already sick of hearing our voices, so it's time to get a fresh perspective. He joins us every Thursday here on the Bet the Board podcast. You, of course, can follow John Sheeran on Twitter at JSheeran. That's JSHEERAN1981. And John, I have to imagine when you got into this particular profession, you didn't think you were going to need a medical degree every single Sunday when it came to setting numbers in the National Football League. What kind of challenges does it provide for you guys in terms of making sure that you're constantly monitoring everything going on, knowing that rescheduling games is much more of a distinct possibility this year than we've ever seen in the past? Is it similar to regular traditional injuries, or does it add a layer of complexity that you guys have had to adjust to on the fly?
Yeah, I think, like you say, the injuries, it's really just a case of weighing up the impact of a performance. I think the COVID scenario is obviously a spread and contact issue where it can actually, affect multiple players. And we know with the incubation period that, players could potentially have it as an underlying factor while not even realizing it. I know most of them are asymptomatic given how healthy a lot of the athletes are, but at the same time, it's definitely an added complexity for us. I think moving games and understanding what's likely to happen with schedules also. If you look at the Steelers against the Eagles this week, for example, the Eagles obviously had to go to San Francisco and get back last weekend. And the Steelers had an impromptu bye week effectively and have had, extended period to get ready for the game. So I think that's where some of the challenges lie for us in setting the lines and assessing what the advantage of those situations is likely to be.
Yeah, it was one of the games that we talked about earlier in the show with Big Ben talking about how it's tough to maintain a rhythm, especially when you're coming back from injury. You're not quite sure what rust is going to do to your game plan with that impromptu bye. Of course, we'll see how Pittsburgh performs as a touchdown favorite this weekend. When we obviously mentioned rescheduling games, we saw that happen this past Monday night. And I have to think from a bookmaker perspective, anytime that you have Patrick Mahomes starting in prime time opposite Aaron Rodgers in a separate football game, that's going to put the books in a little bit of a difficult spot, knowing teaser and moneyline liability is going to get ratcheted up pretty quickly. I'm going to go out on a limb and say that probably wasn't the best scenario playing out on Monday night, but thankfully the game stayed under, so hopefully that was a silver lining.
Yeah, exactly right, Todd. I mean, like you say, these elite quarterbacks, everybody's happy to jump on the numbers, even when they're exaggerated. We were pretty in love with Atlanta this week, and unfortunately it didn't work out. Obviously just couldn't get the offense going, and, Rodgers was able to slice the offense up pretty good, so I think the signs were on the door early in that one, so we were kind of acclimatized to it by the time it happened.
See, Payne, I told you, all we have to do is bet elite quarterbacks in this league, and it would simplify our week-to-week attack plan.
Yeah, that would be much easier. We wouldn't have to spend, 9 hours a week on the podcast, and we just come in here and start firing the best quarterbacks. I have no problem doing that with Patty Mahomes, by the way.
This we know, it's well documented. And John, just being new to this podcast, you're not allowed to say anything negative about Patrick Mahomes in any capacity. Otherwise, Payne threatens to cut off your airtime. So I just wanted to make sure that got out there.
Cool. Yeah, I'll make sure to make a note of that. I don't think too many people have got negative things to say about Pat Mahomes.
When you look at some of the games this weekend, and we'll let Payne ask some more specifics about professional action and all that, where are you guys starting to see some of the liability get ratcheted up, or the games that are generating a lot of early action as we sit here on Thursday?
Yeah, it's actually a little bit slow, some of the games this week. Some of the big favorites that I thought would be popular haven't necessarily appeal just yet. I expect them to do so by the time the games come around. But right now, the bettors are holding their bullets for now. I think the Rams is one that they're definitely honed in on. We're down to 7.5 right now. We were as high as 9.5 when we opened the line. It's about a 9-to-1 ratio in favor of LA, giving a touchdown and just over a touchdown. So that kind of surprises me a little bit. I thought they were, struggled in big parts of the game against New York last week, and Washington defensively are quite strong, as we know. I guess they're a little bit susceptible to play action, and we know that's one of the Rams' strong points. So everybody seems to be willing to take that one. And then I think the other one is Seattle and Minnesota. Seattle are a 7-point favorite right now, about a 6-to-1 ratio of the money there as well. For Seattle, I think it really reminds people a lot of the Dallas game, where you had Seattle as a touchdown favorite, or less in that instance, but as a favorite where two potent offenses and two struggling defenses were matching up. The total's gone up from 54 to 57.5 in that game as well. I think people just trusting Russell Wilson a little bit more than the Minnesota offense, probably leaning on that side. So they're the two that have really kind of appealed so far to the public.
John, you mentioned that move down in the Rams-Washington game from 9.5 down to 7.5, despite the 9-to-1 ticket count in favor of the Rams. I assume you've seen some sharp action on the Washington football team here?
Yeah, and I think it was a bit of a re-rating as well, Payne. I think when you look at the balance of what Washington have done, also maybe a little bit of an overreaction to the start from the Rams. The Giants proved they were able to scheme well defensively against that play action, and once you cut that off, the Rams really didn't offer an awful lot more, and I expect a very similar game plan from Washington this week, and I can definitely see them covering 9.5 or 7.5 against the Rams for sure.
I hate to kind of ask you this off the cuff, but have you guys made any adjustments there for Kyle Allen versus Dwayne Haskins?
Yeah, look, I think it's a very, very tricky one. His record's been pretty poor. I think he's lost all 7 of his last 7 games, Kyle Allen. Haskins clearly hadn't, I think Ron Rivera's comments are telling about Dwayne Haskins. He feels like he's not ready. I think we all kind of knew that anyway. So it's a tricky one to balance, I would say right now. Probably not much of a change in our ratings for the change at QB, but I have a sneaky feeling it may actually be a slight upgrade given Rivera's comments during the week.
Absolutely, and his familiarity with Scott Turner's system. Any other sharp action you're seeing here this week?
I think the sharper action so far has definitely been Chicago. Saw very sharp money at 5.5, and that was a line, to be honest. It was really one we were a little shy on. We should never have been 5.5. Our ratings made it 3.5. I think the market consensus was 5.5, and one that probably slipped us by. That was taken on Monday, and then yesterday the same person came back in for 4.5. I think we're around a field goal now. So that's definitely been one that's moved in relation to tonight, and the other one's been Cleveland. I think that based on what I'm seeing, I think there's a good chance Cleveland goes off favourite against Indianapolis on Sunday. The customer took 2.5. We're at 1.5 and kind of juiced towards Cleveland as well. We think that there's a strong argument for maybe Cleveland being favourite there, so expect that one to move a little bit more before kickoff.
Makes complete sense. And I guess kind of a differing question here. With so many games off the board, how is the volume looking this week? Are players just kind of gravitating towards the games that are on the board with the same amount of volume and action, or are you guys down a little bit this week so far?
Yeah, we've tried to keep a lot of the games on the board. I think the Patriots are probably, or maybe the Bills, I think we've only one game off right now of the ones that are scheduled to go ahead. Obviously some uncertainty around exactly when we'll see those games, whether or not they're pushed to Monday or Tuesday or even further afield. I think yes is the answer, Payne. We have seen it already in the lead up to the return to sports, where bettors were a little bit gun shy because of uncertainty relating to COVID, and that's completely understandable. I think I have a lot of sympathy for those that bet the Patriots last week against Kansas, expecting Cam Newton to play. Obviously, the other side of it is that people got good value on the number they got for the Chiefs, because we had really liked Cam Newton and what that team could have potentially done. So I think there's enough uncertainty there for people to hold their powder a little bit until they get confirmation of who's on the field and when the games are going to be played. But I think once that's sorted out and announced by the NFL, I think then we'll start to see the games kind of ramp up, the volumes ramp up between now and kickoff.
It's always interesting. I mean, knowing that football is king and everybody kind of slots in line for some of the other sporting events going on. But John, I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you, what have you guys seen in the way of Major League Baseball handle with the playoffs now, getting into the divisional series and with a big college football slate? Have you started to see a little bit more appetite as we're getting some of those marquee programs going head to head instead of the top tier institutions playing against some of the also-rans within the league?
Yeah, I think you're right. I think since the SEC's come back, college football's been back to where we would expect it to be. The numbers have been very strong, huge demand, and I think, we spoke about it a couple of weeks ago. College bettors are very loyal. They come back almost regardless of who's on, but I think we've ramped up and generated a lot of kind of a halo effect of other customers now getting involved now that the big teams are back in action with Alabama and Clemson, etc. I think in baseball, the same has been the story. Obviously, it's a more competitive spot with prime time and other sports running that don't normally clash with you. For example, the NBA Finals, that's been long sorted by now in most years. I think the support for the Yankees has been pretty stout, but overall our baseball numbers are pretty strong, Todd, and I'm glad to see that across all sports that it hasn't been diluted. It does seem to be incremental volume. Those that were only betting football are now betting football, baseball and basketball, and college football as well, as you alluded to. So I think, the numbers are strong. We're very positive on the way that it's been so far. I think the postseason's been excellent in the MLB. And the only other thing, if it goes out in time, that I would say is that we definitely did see some sharp money on the unders in the Yankee game today. I don't think anybody expects Montgomery to go too far in that game today, and we may see a similar change in tactics from Boone as we saw in game 2. So if you can get under 9 by the time this goes out, that would look to be a good opportunity to maybe get a few dollars later on today.
There's no doubt this feels like an all-hands-on-deck type performance as the Yankees try and force a pivotal winner-take-all Game 5 scenario, knowing that they'll have potentially Garrett Cole waiting in the wings. Meanwhile, Tampa, all too familiar with cobbling together 27 outs with their bullpen by committee that we've seen with the opener. One last thing, John, because we know a lot of our listeners live and die with the FanDuel Sportsbook. They play there through all of their action. As it pertains to some of the COVID situations, and I probably should have asked this in a more timely manner, when a game gets switched from Sunday to Monday but the venue stays the same, or how does that work out from a house rules standpoint? And the same kind of thing we saw in college football. When there's a change in venue, that bet automatically becomes a refund, if memory serves me correct, right?
Yeah, that's right. And I think I'd have to double check exactly the rules and specifics for each of the individual sports. But normally, if a game is rescheduled for later than 48 hours later, we tend to avoid those as well. So it's just important to check the terms and conditions and the house rules on each sport when you're having a bet. If you are betting on a game that's likely to be moved, it is more than likely, if it's delayed by more than the 48 hours, regardless of the venue, that you will get a refund and then need to replace your bet when the lines are reposted, when we get certainty about when the games are being played.
It's always good to have another voice to reiterate what we tell our listeners, and we've been doing so for years. Make sure you read the stipulations. You know the house rules and everything involved, not only week to week, but of course with season-long bets and how some of these cancellations could impact division totals, win totals, and ultimately those futures that you've been clinging to win the Lombardi Trophy. John, can't thank you enough for your time. I mean, this is great content that we can't get anywhere else every single Thursday. Want to wish you guys the best of luck, and hopefully when we're chatting next week, things go off, relatively speaking, without a hitch, and we're talking about a full slate, maybe with the lone exception, the Titans and Bills not taking place.
Sounds good, guys. Thanks for having me.
So much great info, Payne, that John provides for us every single week. One thing I will say is I don't envy the task of chasing down COVID rumors, whether it's at the NFL level or the collegiate level, as an odds maker. And it's one of the things that is a nice little perk not to be behind the counter in these uncertain times that we're all living through.
Yeah, we're all dealing with it. That's the reality of the situation. So I'm not going to throw John a pity party, because we're the guys on the other side of the counter are dealing with the same thing. So as much as I love John, he's been a great implementation to the podcast, providing a ton of great information. No pity party here, because we're dealing with the same crap on this side.
Well, I'm just glad that you didn't get sad about the public processional that has been the New York Yankees through the first 3 games of the ALDS series. So,
shots again?
You know
Shots
what?
again?
That's a shot.
Very disappointed with Tanaka's performance
Well, that's
last
a
night.
shot that's tougher for me to take because I'm not sure if our listeners know. You do. My family does. My friends. I grew up as a Yankee fan and obviously have allegiance toward the Pinstripes. But earlier this season, we made different investments. And so you have to learn to kind of put your thoughts and your emotions and your heart to the side. So it's putting my rooting interest, so to speak, in a bit of a pickle against the Tampa Bay Rays.
Just for clarity here, when you say different sides, you mean you personally amongst your fandom and your wallet.
Well, yeah, exactly. I mean, I'm
because
I'm always
I just want to make that
I'm
clear.
always going to root for my wallet
the
over
Rays
my fandom.
division, that was pretty hefty from us. Now, we didn't take it one step further and go AL like you, so I'm going to be a fan here and root for my Yankees here at this point. But you are not doing the same.
No, I couldn't do the same because I probably didn't have a significant enough position on the division. Like you guys, I probably lost my ass on the Reds, but that's a different discussion for a different day. All right. We still have one game left to preview, and that, of course, is the Thursday Night Football affair between the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and the Chicago Bears. As John mentioned, we have seen this number move in just one direction in favor of the Bears. Tampa, a 3.5-point favorite at FanDuel. Total on this game sits at 44.5. Payne, let's start with the number first and foremost, because I think a lot of people, when we talked about this on the look-ahead number, went, wait a second, the Bucs are nearly a 6-point favorite in this particular spot. We saw the Colts close a field goal favorite at Chicago. The number tells one story, but I think we get into the X's and O's, we're going to be able to understand why Tampa is such a heavy favorite here.
You know, as we trend towards more sophistication in the market, I don't really want to state the obvious, but we've seen really, I would say, extremely sophisticated pro money on the Bears. The first position was at 6 minus 15 and then 5.5, and then a second wave at 4.5. And then even this morning, you're seeing another graze over that number, and we're now down to 3 some places. And so I can tell you 4.5 is the number we had on this game before factoring in the short week and the slew of weapons for Tampa that are either out and not playing or not nearly 100%. You know, Godwin and O.J. Howard are out. Evans labored around through the entire Chargers game, and now he's on a short week, you know, trying to recover. So that's really what we're seeing here in terms of this number, Todd.
Yeah, and it's always one of those things, and I don't want to get into philosophical discussion for how it all works, because we know bettors don't all do things the same way. There are a lot of guys that look at X's and O's, and ultimately that's the determining factor in what necessitates or prompts them to make a bet. And there's some guys who don't care about the X's and O's. They make a game 3.5, the market opens 6. They're going to bet that thing blindly. And I think it's always fascinating to see that juxtaposition in terms of ways that there are multiple approaches to try and arrive at what you think is a winning position. And when we look at this game, Payne, we know that there are coaching ties that run deep. Bucs coach Bruce Arians and Bears defensive coordinator Chuck Pagano, longtime friends, worked together in Cleveland, Indianapolis. Pagano took over as head coach. He, of course, brought Bruce Arians in as his offensive coordinator. The Bears last week, I don't think there's any way to sugarcoat their performance. We can laud the Colts all we want, but the Bears were downright unprepared and weren't a good buttoned-up football team. 4 penalties on special teams. And they included a block punt. There were 8 penalties overall for 100-plus yards, and the Bears' offense really lacked consistency. Well, guess what? If you couldn't run the ball against Indianapolis, you're probably not going to be able to run the football tonight against this Tampa Bay defensive front.
Right, and that's why, especially right now, it's interesting to see where this market will go, because the matchup is not great for the Bears. And Nagy had his hands full last week. What he put out on tape was abysmal. Both scheme-wise, the pace was a snail-like, the creativity was horrific. Foles looked lost. Way too much running on early downs. I don't know what I saw from Chicago's offense, and it's almost difficult to believe that they handpicked Foles simply because this was a guy that was familiar with their system, and now they're kind of backpedaling and saying, hey, well, he didn't have the full offseason. He didn't have the full camp. The last 3 or 4 weeks where he's been in practice, learning all the, I guess, intricacies of our version of this offense, he apparently doesn't understand. I just think it was horrific across the board. Really conservative last week. No pace whatsoever to allow, Foles to get in form. The play calling was absolutely horrific. And I hate to be like play call guy, But this is really bad because, simply put, you blamed Mitchell Trubisky for all the deficiencies of this offense and how you couldn't be creative enough. And we saw play sheets kind of making its way around the internet and how they'd been really condensed with Mitch Trubisky running the show. And now you have this elaborate play sheet last week that's all marked up and we're going to expand things. And you had receivers coaches coming out and saying, hey, we can now throw back shoulder throws. And the offense was a big fat zero. It was horrific. So I don't know on a short week how much you're going to change, but the pace needs to change. The play calling needs to change. I don't see a situation here where the Bears offense is going to be able to move it on the ground. They haven't been as bad in years past, but they're not overly efficient with Montgomery running it. And you're looking at a Tampa Bay defense that's done nothing but stop the run the last 2 seasons. Number 2 again in defensive rush efficiency this year. So this game is going to be on Foles' shoulders. I think you have to go a little tempo. I think you have to get him throwing on early downs, right? Those are all the things that work. But what's really interesting here, when you look at Todd Bowles' Buccaneers defense, they're the 6th best defending first down passes. They haven't allowed a single explosive run on first down. So really, they have been fantastic on early down defense. And suddenly you have this offense that's operating under a new quarterback that doesn't have the most sophistication from its head coach, likely operating in these 3rd and long situations. The X's and O's don't really mesh with the number approach here, and that's, Todd, kind of one thing that we always do here. It's a combination of both. We're constantly looking at our numbers. Is there value in the number? And then the second level is, what does the matchup look like? And so I get it. The Buccaneers are decimated with offensive injuries. But defensively, I think they're probably going to give Chicago a hard time here unless Matt Nagy and Nick Foles are humming on all gears here. And again, it just needs to be a little bit more efficient of attack. Have some pace about you. Get in form. Get in rhythm early. And that'll be the key here. If you're watching this, Chicago will have a chance if their offense is humming at a little bit better of a tempo and pace early on in this game.
And let's not kid ourselves. We back out the 4th quarter with the Bears' offensive explosion against the Lions, the 4th quarter explosion against the Falcons. Things look pretty bleak for everything that this team has done, regardless of who their quarterback has been so far this season. Meanwhile, on the other side, Payne, there's a chance that the Bucs could be down as many as their top 4 receivers. We know about Mike Evans, who you mentioned off the top. Scotty Miller dealing with some nagging injuries as well, although he's a local product, so I'm sure he'd love to get out there and play. I believe he went to Barrington High School. 2 of their veteran running backs were absent from the walkthroughs. I don't expect Leonard Fournette or LaShawn McCoy to be out there either, which means it'll be a Ronald Jones-type game. Meanwhile, though, you look at Tom Brady, 369 yards passing, 5 touchdowns in a 17-point comeback against the Chargers last week. He officially became the NFL's winningest player. Career versus the Bears, 5-0 record, nearly 1,600 yards, 14 touchdowns. When you look at how Tampa should go about attacking this Bears defense, we said last week when the Colts went in there, you can run the ball against this Bears defensive front. Throwing into the teeth of that Bears defense gets to be a little bit more precarious. Do you think Tampa employs a ground and pound approach, knowing they're a little bit thin at the running back position?
I'm not quite sure. And to your point, Tom's been fantastic. Something I think we expected this offseason with all the enhanced weaponry, offensive-minded coach. That
I didn't think he'd be this good. I'm not going to lie.
I was trying to be nice and say we.
No.
I was trying to be nice here. I'm team player.
Well, you know what? You can say that I was wrong. I thought that Tom may have been at the tail end of his career.
Early. It's still undecided.
Yeah, we'll see how
maybe
things look.
A rash of injuries hit and you get proven right.
I don't root for misfortune. Hold on. I don't root for misfortune. I can admit that I'm wrong. Tom has been reinvigorated with that, Central Florida air quality or whatever the hell it is, or the weapons around him. And, it's been fun to watch him wear a different jersey and have some success early on this season.
It doesn't look awkward on him either. That's the one thing that's always interesting. You always have like these historic players potentially towards the end of their career go to a different team and you're like, this just looks and feels wrong. And obviously I'm not a Patriots fan, Todd, but
I just hope
it looks and feels okay to me.
I just hope, and I think a lot of football fans hopefully feel the same way, that there is one game this year where Tampa goes with the throwback creamsicles and we get to see Tom Brady wearing the creamsicle with the old school Buccaneer helmet with the knife in his mouth and everything else. Then we'll know we've officially made it as football fans.
We just need Fournette to borrow Mike Allstott's pads and we'll be there. So, looking at this, right now Tampa's offense 7th in offensive efficiency. They've been extremely balanced, to your point, top 12 in both rushing and passing efficiency, and it's came against a schedule that's better than average defensively. So those are the things that you like to see, right? This was an offense that was kind of mixing new parts together, new schemes together. Is it going to be Tom's offense? Is it going to be Bruce's offense? Is it going to be a mix? It's actually been a little bit more of Bruce's offense that Tom's operating in perfectly. But when you look at how to attack this Bears defense, we touched on it last week against the Colts. I know that Bruce and Tom like their 3 wide sets and they like to chuck it a little bit, but they do run a good bit of offense from 2 tight end sets. And I think with some of those receiver injuries that we mentioned there, with Godwin down, with Evans kind of battling through some injuries on a short week, maybe we see more 2 tight end sets. And that's something, when you look at this Bears defense, they are actually abysmal defending passes from 2 tight end sets. Chicago's allowed a 158 passer rating and 12.4 yards per pass attempt from 2 tight end sets. Maybe we get a little Gronk, Cameron Brate action simultaneously here. That, I think, will go a long way. You mentioned Scotty Miller. He's been fantastic. It's a kid that Tom Brady kind of called out in camp as being like his guy doing everything right. He's always in the right spot. He feels like that Julian Edelman type. He's tough. He's a kid who kind of battled through some injuries last week to play and had a major impact. Probably don't win that game without Scotty Miller against the Chargers. So that's Tom's favorite target. It would be a blow if he wasn't able to go tonight, but I think he's tough. You mentioned kind of the homecoming of sorts. I think Scotty Miller's out there. But if I'm the Bucs, you are getting that ground game going. Get it back to Ronald Jones. And when you do pass from 12 formation, because it's absolutely eaten the Bears alive. The other thing here is Tom and the offensive line have done pretty well here. And you're looking at a Bears unit. They went out, signed Robert Quinn to big money to bring in this pass rusher aside from Khalil Mack. It just isn't working right now. The Bears' defensive line, which we thought was a strength, we've kind of already touched on. They've been beaten up a little bit on the ground, but they've also gotten to quarterbacks just 19% of the time with their pressure rate. Something to watch for here tonight. We kind of hinted at this a little bit. Khalil Mack isn't 100%. He's battling through some things. Let's just kind of call it that. Akeem Hicks, same kind of thing, battling through some injuries there. So those guys aren't healthy along that defensive line, and that's supposed to be the best aspect of this defense. So right now at basically 3, what we're looking at, this is a stay away from me in terms of this side.
Interesting game. I think we'll begin to learn even more about the Chicago Bears and how they bounce back in this particular spot on the heels of a downright dreadful offensive performance. Meanwhile, Tampa traveling down a few weapons on a short week. Let's see what Tom Brady can do. We know he's done more with less than any quarterback in league history. We'll see if that trend can continue this evening. Payne, 4 big games broken down only as eloquently as you can do. I love the fact coming into this show, you go, yeah, we have 4 games. We're going to go relatively quickly. I'm looking at the clock. That, of course, hasn't been the case. I should max bet the over every time we talk about said things before we jump on air. We do have one final order of business to transact, though, and the question remains, where will we go for our best investment for the NFL Week 5?
Todd, let's go back to our roots here. The home of the first half under here at Bet the Board.
Can you do that in 2020? Can you bet games under the total in the National Football League?
I'm trying to navigate that question as best I can without divulging too much. So you know that I have changed my ways a little bit, right?
This I do, and it was shocking to the system. Most notably my dad, who is the only one that I share all the games we bet with because I know there's going to have no impact on screens or anything else. And he actually asked if we were okay when I shared last weekend's slate.
And we kind of decided to, last week, do some things we don't normally do. And that was go early, and it kind of impacted everything. But we are now just kind of, generally speaking, across the board this week, if I look at, part of the model things we do, in addition to, obviously, all the matchup work, there's only 3 games that indicated any value on the over, and they were all minor. So it looks like the books have done a good job adjusting a little bit this week. And then you have, obviously, the addition of the hurricane in the Gulf. When is it going to hit? Kind of slowed down a little bit, so it doesn't look like it's going to have as large of an impact. But the total that we're looking at has some potential weather in it. That would just be an added element here. But Let's go with the Eagles-Steelers first half under 22.5, widely available. Playable down to, I think, 21.5. Obviously, there are no key numbers there, but you always want to get the best number possible, especially when you've moved the extra point back. So we'll call it 22.5. Right now, when you're looking at Philadelphia's offense, Todd, and we kind of broke this down already with this game at the top, it's kind of a manufactured offense. There really isn't any, knock on wood here, big play potential. It feels like a lot of a grinder type offense. We're going to hand it off just to kind of stay balanced. We're going to use Carson Wentz's legs. It's going to be a short passing attack. And you don't know how well that's going to bode against the Steelers defense. The key here is Carson Wentz not making the critical turnover. If he doesn't make the critical turnover, I think this is has a ton of value. I can tell you the full game has been hit under by some extremely sharp professionals. So I have no problem going back to the well here. You mentioned some of Big Ben's quotes about potentially being out of form and rhythm.
We can only hope.
Yes, with that bye week that was not planned. So you may get a slow start here from Pittsburgh's offense in that regard. In the one area where Philadelphia has been really good is on that defensive line. Now that they are fully healthy, they've done a good job stopping the run, getting some pressure, and I think that will bode well here. Hopefully Avonte Maddox does return for the Eagles in the secondary, kind of a homecoming here back to Pittsburgh after playing for the Steelers. So I know he's trying to get out there this week. Would be a nice addition to that secondary as well. So let's go first half under. Eagles-Steelers, 22.5.
Works for me. Points at a premium, plenty of punts. The only way we would like things to unfold in the lovely state of Pennsylvania. Going under the number for two in-state rivals, so to speak. Any final words of wisdom, Payne? Parting shots, things you'd like to get off your chest before you get a 72-hour vacation from me?
No, that is it. That's it. Get out of Dodge.
Special thanks to John Sheeran, who joins us every single Thursday. Encourage folks to follow him on Twitter at JSheeran, JSheeran, I believe. If I butchered that, I apologize. You can find it on our Twitter. You can follow Payne on Twitter at Payne Insider. I'm Todd Furman. Follow me there as well. And most importantly, follow the podcast at Bet the Board Pod. Best of luck with all your NFL Week 5 selections. And come Sunday afternoon in the first half, under ticket in your hand.
Thanks for listening to Bet the Board. You can catch Todd and Payne every Monday, Wednesday, and Thursday during football season, breaking down the biggest NFL and college football games. And to make sure you don't miss any free best bets, subscribe to Bet the Board on iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts.